Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Silvadi Suruswandi. I come from Senior High School of Ciawi. I'm here as the first speaker of Affirmative Theme. Alright, as the first speaker of Affirmative Theme, I'd like to deliver about the impact of restrict freedom of speech due to the economic and cultural aspect, while the second speaker will deliver about the impact of restrict freedom of speech due to the political and social aspect. So ladies and gentlemen, as we know, government is a group of people that have the power to rule in a territory according law. This territory may be a country, a state of province within a country, or a region. So restrict freedom of speech, it means that the government sets a limit to public in terms of giving statement, opinion, or speech. Because of that, we strongly believe that restrict freedom of speech will bring bad impacts from many aspects, and it breaks human right in giving speech, opinion, and statement. So it causes apathy between public and the government. It just makes the government to do whatever they want without considering about public suggestion. Since the government gives limitation to the public about delivering their opinions, exactly, everyone has the same right to speak out about their feeling. Furthermore, the relationship between citizen and government is very important. This relating to the communication. If the government restricts the freedom of speech, of course, there will be misunderstanding between both of them. At the last, all the citizens won't be able to feel comfortable and peaceful living in that country because everybody will blame each other. So ladies and gentlemen, on the other hand, we have the same right to contribute and controlling the course of the government directly or indirectly. The economy will get the impact from restriction freedom of speech. The example is the course of economy is not the same as what public expected and tend to be harmful and authoritarian. Dear ladies and gentlemen, due to the motion, if we see from economic perspective, the restrict freedom of speech affected the economy because it's relating to state finance and very sensitive. We need to shut up if we feel something goes wrong with our economy, and we need to express it. Because every single decision that taken by the government, of course, will affect it to the public society. So that's why we need to express our argument. It can be through people representative, or we call it TPR. So if somebody asks about why is freedom of speech is very important in the first place, alright. In fact, one reason is that a free market for ideas will lead to the truth, which is essential for selecting wise policies. This is an instrumental justification for this freedom in terms of other types of goods. And then also the freedom of speech will bring positive impact. For the example, it makes citizens more creative and innovative in terms of contributing in economic system. Nowadays, the freedom of speech gives a good cooperation between citizen and government. Communication is a must. Therefore, a public might ask about the cost of production, distribution, tax, or etc. They need transparency. Their audiences in Indonesia itself, based on Freedom House, the reappearance of the third of civil liberties made Indonesia down from the status of free state to be partly free state. Proven by our democratic ranking are free falling 20 ranks from 48 to 68. Our current democratic ranking is even worse than Timor-Leste or ex-East Timor. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's clear that restrict the freedom of speech made the government or country to be unstable, and it caused many complex problems. Well, let's move to another case, which is from the cultural perspective. Restriction freedom of speech in democratic country, of course, will deviate from democratic culture itself, because the small elements of democracy are people's involvement in political decision making. level equality of rights between citizens, and the level of freedom and independence granted to maintain it and owned by citizens. The representative system and the electoral system and provisions majority. Owing to this restriction, there are many stigma in public that government runs the government as they wish. Therefore, an authoritarian government system emerged. The reason why is the restrict freedom of speech will affect to the culture is due to every democratic country has its own democratic culture. Thus, the freedom of speech is a basic life in democratic society. We'll see from democratic country, the example Indonesia, that have democratic culture. Since colonial to independence, our heroes pointed out to always be critical and democratic. In fact, the most effective way to develop the democratic culture is implementing in practice. Based on Clause 1, Law Number 7 of 1998 concerning about freedom of speech in a public is the right of every citizen to convey their opinion through verbally, written, or etc. freely and responsibly according to applicable laws and regulations. Thus, people are free to issue opinion, but also need regulation in issuing this opinion so as not cause a prolonged conflict between community members. My final thought is there are many bad impacts from restricting freedom of speech because there are stigma in public. Otherwise, the real democratic state government will avoid a corruption, collusion, and behavior nepotism, because the behavior will damage the chance of community life nationally and having state and endangering the state existence. In addition, this helps to reduce stigma in public. As the principle of democracy is from people, by people, and for people. Well, I can conclude that the restricted freedom of speech is not the right answer or the right solution to reduce the abuse of right. That's all being from me. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adnan Fadila from Senior High School of Wan Chiawi. The second speaker of affirmative team will deliver my argument for today's motion. That is, the government should not restrict freedom of speech. We believe that freedom of speech or freedom of expression is without a doubt a human right to give any opinion and ideas without fear of sanction and or getting a censorship because of your opinion is a right and should not be restricted. If it is restricted, the effects by any means isn't small. It affects many aspects in life. And as the second speaker, I will tell you the effects in the political and social aspect. First, the political aspect. Since trust between government and the people is important within a country, especially a democratic one, such as this country, Indonesia, if a government holds the power without any criticism or opposition's opinion and even silence any opposition's opinion, then that opposing them, that will make them fall in line of dictatorship, though not as far as a totalitarian regime, such as we all know the Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. But if a country starts to silence any criticism or opinion that opposing them, it might be heading towards an authoritarianism form of government. It perhaps not sound as bad as a totalitarianism, but will be very limiting to political freedom. There won't be any free elections. The opposition parties will not hold any power. The protests will be hardly suppressed to maintain the regime and the image of the regime itself. It will be better if the government decide to adapt by time. But many of the authoritarian will tighten their grip on the opposition itself. There are many examples or evidence for this, such as in People's Republic of China, that governed by the Chinese Communist Party or CCP, has always been famous for their authoritarianism, where they constantly suppressing opinions, censoring media and information from outside of their country, and giving their people propaganda. The most recent one probably is the death of the whistleblower doctor from Wuhan, Dr. Li Wenliang, about COVID-19 outbreak, whose early warning were ignored and repressed by the government, that many people believe would have made the world prepare more for the countermeasure for the outbreak. In our country, it mostly happened during the New Order regime from 1966 to 1998. There were many cases to silence the opposition by the regime, with many activists end up missing or dead. Several famous cases are the death of Marcina, the disappearance of Wiji Tukul, and more. So, restriction on freedom of speech will cause more harm than good, because the government is likely to abuse it to maintain the regime and benefit their own than the people. And now moving to the social aspect. In today's society, people tend to more focus on the internet and the social media, where expressing yourself is the main focus there. So, restricting freedom of speech and expressing yourself in this era is not good by any means. Just imagine getting arrested just because you told a joke online. That would be absurd. In today's, everyone should be free to say their opinion, because we always thought that we need to respect anyone's opinion regardless, even if it is offensive, stupid, or even offensive for us. We don't get too offended too easily today, because that's how the world works now. And the government is applied to that too. The government should not restrict people's opinions online, even if it is controversial or provocative. Instead, restricting it to a certain extent will be better, so people won't misusing it for their own benefit, such as blackmailing or committing frauds, terror, and more. Letting people express themselves in this day is important for a good and productive society, so they don't feel oppressed by their own belief, such as the flat earth community, the vegans community, or the anti-vaxxer community. Even though their opinion is pretty much controversial for ourselves in many ways, they deserve to believe in their opinion, as long as they don't harm any people by it. Some exception for the extremists that always think that their opinion are always right. And the evidence for this, it still recently happened, is the Black Lives Matter movement that spread across the United States, caused by the death of an African American by the name of George Floyd by a policeman in Minneapolis. It caused a nationwide protest against racial discrimination in the United States. But unfortunately, these protests tainted by the anarchists and rioters that wreaks havoc, while the real protest by social activists takes place because of some extremists take it to their own benefit than people's benefit. That is why we need to limit some of the most extremist belief, instead of restrict it altogether and affect people that don't even know or don't even intend to harm any people and just want to express themselves. That's why too much restriction itself will cause more harm than good, especially on a right and on a basic human rights that all people should have. By the time, the oppression will cause many protests that could lead to a large-scale revolt, to even a coup d'etat attempts from the people in the country itself. That is all for my argument. Thank you.
Good morning, all the members of this house. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Karina Salsa Sabila, as third speaker of an affirmative team from Senior High School 1 Ciawi. Ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, our motion today for this debate is this house believes that government should not restrict the freedom of speech. And we are from the affirmative team strongly believe this statement is true. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as our first speaker said about the definition of this motion, we could know freedom of speech is a principle that supports the freedom of an individual or a community to articulate their opinion and their ideas without fear and pressure from anyone. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom of speech is so important to the government itself. In a country, the citizens help to build a country. The government must know what the public want, because by that, government can hear the voice of the citizens and therefore can help government's actions in building their country. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone has the right to express their opinions no matter who the person is. Even so, there are still many divisions about freedom of speech. If the government providing restriction on speech, it will cause many adverse effects. A good government should be a government that not only hears the people shouting in front of them, but also the government should hear whispers and complaints for people far down there. That is, the government should not be only hears the officially people, but also all the public in that region. Ladies and gentlemen, our first speakers also presented the argument that restriction of freedom of speech have a bad impact at economy aspect. When mentioning the word freedom, the related thing is not only about freedom of opinion or association, but also freedom to achieve welfare. Reflecting in the enveloping globalization, economic freedom is expected to facilitate individuals to present the best choices for themselves rather than depend on the other parties. Economic freedom also translates as the ease of opening a business. Ladies and gentlemen, on the other hand, freedom of speech and economic will bring positive impact for that country, because the citizens will more be creative and innovative to contributing an economic system. If the citizens are active in building the economy, the country will become more advanced because the economy is advancing and developing. Ladies and gentlemen, highlighting the countries that rank highest in the Corruption Perception Index, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden are also used the economic freedom, and they include welfare countries. This of course can conclude the relationship between economic freedom and the progress of that country. The more citizens are allowed to do any business, the more varied and equitable the work the citizen can do in that country. Ladies and gentlemen, now let's move on to the next point. Our second speaker already said about impact at political aspect. We all know that freedom of speech is the key to harmonious relationship between government and citizens. With this trust, of course, it will make easy for people to follow instruction from the government. But if the public losing the trust of the government, of course, it will make difficult to the country itself, especially for a country that uses a democratic system as Indonesia. This freedom of speech is a fundamental thing that cannot be eliminated. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom of speech is not small thing because there are legal regulations governing this matter. For example, the Bill of Rights in the US of America, the Declaration of the Right of Man and of the Citizens in France, and in Indonesia itself are regulated in the Constitution of Article 28E, paragraph 3. Ladies and gentlemen, limitation of opinion will of course have a lot of effects for that region. The government cannot do whatever they want to do because they work for the people. So the government should listen what the public's aspiration and what the public want. That's why giving public restriction of speech will just show people how government are not respecting its people human rights and show them how government abusing their power. Ladies and gentlemen, politics is a collection of the opinion of most politicians. So how can you create a police and political activities that are healthy and on target if freedom of speech is restricted? If freedom of speech is ignored, then it can cause resentment in society. Many upliftment events will occur. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the real examples is that in Indonesia, the tragedy Trisakti. The Trisakti tragedy was a shooting incident on May 12, 1998, against students at a demonstration demanding Suharto and from his position. This incident killed 4 students at Trisakti University. Ladies and gentlemen, the above explanation clearly show that restrict the freedom of speech brings bad impact for country itself, and it breaks human rights in giving a speech, opinion, or statement. And then, restriction of freedom of speech is not a good policy, and it's not such a thing that government can do to the public, because it will make a bad impact on all the aspects in that country, and it will cause losing trust of the government itself. So, our final decision, we are, the affirmative team, strongly believe this motion is true. That's all for us. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.